The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of prairie dust, and Ezekiel Thornfield felt his world shift on its axis. She stepped down like morning mist given form, all pale silk and trembling hands, her eyes cast toward the weathered planks of Millbrook's only boardwalk. This was his bride, the woman whose letters had been filled with gentle words and careful penmanship. Yet something in the way she moved spoke of secrets deeper than the canyon winds. Cordelia Ashworth lifted her chin just enough to meet his gaze, and in that single moment, Ezekiel saw a lightning flash behind storm clouds. Her voice came soft as creek water over stones when she spoke his name, but her grip on her traveling bag betrayed white knuckles and a strength that seemed at odds with her delicate frame. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will blow your mind. The other passengers hurried past them toward the general store, leaving them standing in the amber light of late afternoon. Ezekiel removed his hat, running weathered fingers through hair the color of winter wheat. "Welcome to Millbrook, Miss Ashworth," he said, though something in her eyes made him wonder if that was truly her name. She nodded once, a gesture so brief it might have been a shiver, and he found himself studying the way shadows fell across her face, as if she were already disappearing before his eyes. The preacher's cabin sat at the edge of town like a weathered prayer, its windows glowing amber against the approaching dusk. Cordelia walked beside Ezekiel in silence that stretched between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Her boots made no sound on the dirt path, and he found himself wondering how someone could move with such careful quiet, as if she had learned to disappear long before she ever appeared. Reverend Malone greeted them with flour-dusted hands and a smile that crinkled at the corners. The ceremony would be simple, he explained, gesturing toward the small parlor where evening light filtered through calico curtains. Cordelia nodded and stepped forward, but as she reached for the worn Bible, her sleeve pulled back to reveal a thin white scar across her wrist. Ezekiel felt something cold settle in his chest. That mark spoke of violence, of survival, of stories no mail-order bride should carry. When she caught him looking, her eyes flashed with something almost dangerous before softening back to dove-gray innocence. "Do you, Ezekiel Thornfield, take this woman?" Reverend Malone began, but the words seemed to echo strangely in the small room. Cordelia's fingers trembled against his palm, yet her grip was firm as steel cable. He found himself studying her face in the lamplight, searching for truth beneath the careful mask of shy submission she wore like a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit. The cabin Ezekiel had prepared for his bride felt smaller, with her presence filling its corners like smoke. Cordelia moved through the single room with careful steps, her fingers trailing over the rough-hewn table he had built with his own hands. She paused at the window, gazing out at the prairie that stretched endless under starlight, and for a moment her careful mask slipped away entirely. "I know this land," she whispered, so soft he almost missed it. Then she caught herself, color rising in her cheeks. It reminded me of home." But when Ezekiel asked where home might be, she turned away and began unpacking her few belongings with hands that moved too quickly, too efficiently. The way she folded her traveling dress spoke of someone accustomed to leaving in haste, and when she pulled a small derringer from the bottom of her satchel, his breath caught in his throat. "For protection," she said without looking at him, sliding the weapon beneath her pillow with practiced ease. "A lady traveling alone must be careful." Outside, coyotes sang their wild songs to the moon, but inside the cabin, silence stretched between husband and wife like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Ezekiel settled into his chair by the fire, watching shadows dance across her face and wondering what kind of woman carried a gun to her marriage bed. 3 strangers rode into Millbrook at dawn, their horses lathered with sweat and their eyes hard as winter stone. Ezekiel watched them from the mercantile porch where he stood with Cordelia, her hand tightening on his arm like a bird's claw. The men wore city clothes dusted with trail dirt, and something in their bearing made his skin crawl with warning. "They're looking for someone," Cordelia breathed, her voice barely audible above the morning wind. Her face had gone pale as creek ice, and she stepped closer to the shadows cast by the store's overhang. The lead rider dismounted and approached old Henrik at the livery stable, pulling something from his vest pocket. Even from this distance, Ezekiel could see it was a photograph. Henrik shook his head and pointed toward the hotel, but his eyes kept drifting toward where Cordelia stood frozen like prey sensing wolves. "We should go home," she whispered, already turning away from the street. But as they walked, Ezekiel noticed how she chose the route that kept buildings between them and the strangers, how her steps had gained an urgency that spoke of long-practiced flight. That evening, as lamplight flickered across their cabin walls, Cordelia sat by the window with her derringer in her lap, watching the darkness with eyes that had seen too much. Whatever those men wanted, Ezekiel realized the sound came at midnight, a soft scratching against the cabin door like branches in wind, but no trees grew that close to their home. Ezekiel reached for his rifle, but Cordelia was already moving, sliding from their bed with the fluid silence of smoke. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, derringer ready, and gestured for him to stay back. When the scratching came again, she mouthed the word 3 to him, holding up fingers in the darkness. Somehow she knew exactly how many men waited outside, as if she could read danger the way others read weather signs. The door rattled softly as someone tested the latch. Cordelia shifted her weight, and Ezekiel saw the woman he had married disappear entirely, replaced by someone who moved like a hunting cat. Her breathing had changed, becoming controlled and purposeful, and when she looked at him across the darkness, her eyes held a terrible competence. A shadow passed by the window, and she fired once through the thin glass. A man's curse split the night air, followed by the sound of boots running toward horses. Within moments, hoofbeats thundered away into the prairie darkness, but Cordelia remained pressed against the wall, gun raised, counting heartbeats until she was certain they had truly gone. "Who are you?" he whispered into the silence that followed. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight streaming through the broken window, he saw tears on her cheeks mixed with something that looked remarkably like relief. Dawn brought no comfort, only the cold reality of shattered glass and blood drops on their doorstep. Cordelia sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, but Ezekiel noticed she hadn't taken a single sip. The careful mask she wore had cracked during the night, and now he could see the haunted woman beneath. "My name isn't Cordelia Ashworth," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It's Catherine Dalton, and 6 months ago, I saw 3 men murder a federal judge in Kansas City." The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. She told him about working as a seamstress in the judge's household, about delivering mending to his study and finding him bleeding on the floor while 3 men in expensive suits rifled through his papers. One of them had looked up and seen her standing frozen in the doorway. "They killed the cook and the housekeeper," she continued, staring into her untouched coffee. "I ran. I've been running ever since." The mail-order bride advertisement seemed like salvation, a chance to disappear into someone else's life. Outside, birds sang their morning songs as if the world hadn't shifted beneath their feet. Ezekiel studied his wife's face, seeing truth written in every line of exhaustion, every careful breath. The shy bride who had stepped off the stagecoach was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had witnessed evil and survived to tell about it. Ezekiel set down his coffee cup with hands that shook despite his efforts to remain steady. The woman across from him had just confessed to witnessing murder, to living under a false name, to bringing danger to his doorstep. Any reasonable man would demand she leave, would protect himself and his quiet life from the storm that followed her. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her trembling fingers with his own. "They'll come back," Catherine said, testing her real name like a word in a foreign language. "Those men have money and connections. They won't stop until I'm dead." The weight of her truth settled between them like winter snow, cold and inescapable. Through the broken window, Ezekiel could see neighbors beginning their morning routines, unaware that violence had visited their peaceful town. Mrs. Henderson hung laundry on her line while her children played in the dirt yard, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. "Then we leave," he said simply, "tonight, before they have time to bring more men." Catherine's eyes widened, searching his face for deception or regret. "Why would you do that? You barely know me. Everything I told you is a lie." But Ezekiel had seen the truth in how she moved to protect him during the attack, had heard it in the way her voice broke when she spoke of the murdered servants. The woman who sat before him now was worth 10 of the painted ladies who frequented the saloon, worth fighting for despite the cost. By evening they had packed what little would fit in saddlebags, leaving behind the life Ezekiel had built with his own hands. Catherine moved through the cabin like a woman preparing for battle, checking supplies and escape routes with efficiency that spoke of too much practice. She had done this before, he realized, many times. The horses were saddled and waiting in the barn when the sound of approaching riders froze them both. Through a crack in the barn door, Ezekiel counted 6 men this time, their leader dismounting with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "We know you're here," the man called toward the cabin, his voice carrying across the yard like a death sentence. "Miss Dalton, you've caused us considerable trouble. Come out, and we'll make this quick." Catherine's hand found Ezekiel's in the darkness, her fingers ice-cold despite the warm evening. "I won't let them hurt you," she whispered. "I'll go to them, and this before anyone else gets killed." But Ezekiel had spent years reading the intentions of wild horses and dangerous men. These weren't the kind who left witnesses alive, and Catherine's sacrifice would only buy him minutes before they silenced him permanently. "No," he breathed against her ear. "We fight, or we run together. But I won't watch you walk into that darkness alone." Outside, Boots approached the cabin door with the measured tread of men who believed they held all the power. They had no idea they were about to discover what a cornered cowboy could do. The barn door exploded outward as Ezekiel's horse burst through. Catherine pressed against his back with her derringer already firing. 2 men dove aside as hoofbeats thundered across the yard, but the leader raised his rifle with deadly calm. The shot split the night air, and Catherine cried out as blood bloomed across her shoulder. They made it past the cabin before the next volley came, bullets whining through the darkness like angry wasps. Ezekiel urged his mount toward the creek where cottonwoods offered cover, but behind them, horses pounded in pursuit. Catherine's grip around his waist grew weaker with each stride, her blood soaking through his shirt. At the creek bank, she slipped from the saddle despite his efforts to hold her. Her face was pale as moonlight, but her eyes blazed with determination. "Go," she gasped, pressing something into his hand. "Find Marshal Brady in Denver. Tell him what I saw." The object was a small leather pouch containing papers that felt like Catherine's death warrant and salvation wrapped together. But Ezekiel had not come this far to abandon her now. He lifted her back onto the horse despite her protests, his jaw set with the stubborn resolve that had carried him through every hardship life had offered. The sound of approaching riders grew louder, but ahead lay the narrow canyon trail that would either lead them to freedom or become their grave. Either way, they would face it together. The canyon trail wound upward through walls of red stone that seemed to bleed in the moonlight. Catherine's breathing had grown shallow against Ezekiel's back, her consciousness fading with each labored mile. Behind them, the sound of pursuit had faded as their pursuers struggled with the treacherous path, but ahead lay challenges that would test them both beyond endurance. At a narrow ledge, Ezekiel dismounted and gathered Catherine in his arms, feeling how light she had become, how fragile. Her skin burned with fever, and the makeshift bandage he had torn from his shirt was soaked through with blood. Time was running out like water through cupped hands. "Stay with me," he whispered as her eyes fluttered closed. "Tell me about Kansas City, about your life before all this started." Catherine's voice came weak but steady, painting pictures of a world beyond their desperate flight. She spoke of morning light through lace curtains, of the judge's kindness to a poor seamstress, of dreams she had harbored before witnessing evil shattered her simple life. With each word, Ezekiel felt her slipping away, felt the cruel irony of finding love only to lose it. The eastern sky began to pale with dawn as they crested the ridge. Below them stretched a valley green with promise, and in the distance, smoke rose from a settlement that might offer salvation. But Catherine had gone silent in his arms, her breathing so faint he had to press his ear to her lips to be certain she still lived. The settlement was called Haven's Rest, and it lived up to its name with a doctor who asked no questions and steady hands that knew their way around bullet wounds. Catherine lay unconscious on the examination table while Doc Morrison worked, his weathered face grim with concentration. Ezekiel paced the small room like a caged wolf, the leather pouch of evidence burning in his pocket. "She's lost too much blood," the doctor said without looking up from his stitching. "Another hour, and it would have been too late. You got here just in time." Outside, hoofbeats announced the arrival of riders, and Ezekiel's hand moved instinctively to his gun. Through the window, he saw Marshal Brady himself dismounting, the star on his vest catching morning sunlight. Word had somehow reached him, perhaps through telegraph lines or the network of lawmen who hunted the same shadows. Catherine's eyes fluttered open as voices approached the door, and she gripped Ezekiel's hand with surprising strength. "The papers," she whispered urgently. "They have names, dates, everything Judge Morrison gathered before they killed him." When Marshal Brady entered the room, his face was carved from granite determination. "Miss Dalton," he said, removing his hat, "I've been looking for you for 6 months. Are you ready to help me put these men away forever?" Catherine looked at Ezekiel, then back at the marshal, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled without fear shadowing her eyes. 6 weeks later, Catherine stood beside Ezekiel on the courthouse steps in Denver, watching the last of Judge Morrison's killers led away in chains. The papers she had carried through hell and back had proven more valuable than gold, containing evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Justice had finally found its voice. The scar on her shoulder would fade with time, but the strength she had discovered in herself would remain forever. No longer did she move through the world like a frightened bird seeking shadows. When she walked now, it was with the confidence of a woman who had faced the worst evil could offer and emerged victorious. Marshal Brady shook Ezekiel's hand with genuine respect. "You've got yourself a remarkable woman," he said. "Not many would have risked everything for justice." They bought a small ranch outside Colorado Springs where Catherine could heal and they could build something lasting together. On their wedding night, their real wedding night, she had told him the secret that left him shaking until dawn was not fear or danger, but the overwhelming realization that he had married the bravest woman he had ever known. Have you ever found belonging in unexpected places? Tell us about your moment of acceptance in the comments below. Each morning brought new promises written in sunrise over the mountains, and Catherine Thornfield no longer looked over her shoulder for shadows from the past. She had found her home at last,